going on, YouTube universe? Welcome to the Hip and Shoulder, where we discuss everything Australian rules football, and with another round of action in the books, it is now time for us to dive into another edition of the round recap. And round 22 was one that I think was painted with a tainted brush. I don't like going down the route of talking about the adjudication of rules all the time or the umpiring, because I don't want people tuning into these videos and thinking, oh, this dickhead's just carrying on about the umpiring again, you know, get a new shtick. But this particular round, I feel, was one of the worst adjudicated rounds of football when it comes to umpiring, and especially if we're walking down the route of one team getting the better rub of the green more so than the other. Now, you can argue that for any round when it comes to football, because there are many rounds and many games over the course of many years where one team seems to get the favour of the umpiring versus the other, but I feel it wasn't as starkly contrasted and plainly obvious as this particular round. So much so that I think every match day thread that I've seen posted by the AFL or Fox Footy or Triple M, there are neutral supporters going absolutely nuts with comments about, you know, this team didn't win without the umpiring. Oh, you know, this team obviously paid the umpires, and comments thereabouts. It was very rough, considering this was a round that contains one of the best games, if not the best game of the year that was played. And even that game was marred in, you know, some controversial decisions, and not even, you know, the decisions paid, but those not paid. And I think that is the biggest thing that we're going to be talking about today. So strap yourselves in and get your tinfoil hat on, you know, get the tinfoil hats on, because we are going to be talking about adjudication and umpiring. And, you know, some people might think I'm a conspiracy nut, I don't know, but we're kicking things off with Thursday night footy, the Bulldogs taking on North Melbourne at Marvel Stadium, in a game that had many implications. The Bulldogs wanting to play finals, must-win game for them. North Melbourne still remaining in the hunt, potentially, if, you know, things mathematically go right on the ladder, for a wildcard spot. So both teams had something to fight for, and it was North Melbourne in the end that walked away with a 23-point win. Now, given how North Melbourne had played the 2 weeks prior to this game, I honestly thought the Bulldogs were going to make an absolute meal of them, because there were 2 games running that North Melbourne fumbled losses in games where they just lacked any defensive output or pressure in the final term and allowed the opposition to get on top of them. But this was a game where North Melbourne put the foot down in the last term and ran away with the game. And it's just a polar opposite to what we have seen delivered to us for the couple of weeks prior to this particular outing. Not to say North Melbourne weren't dominant throughout this entire game, because it was North Melbourne's momentum entirely. The Bulldogs wrestled it back a little bit, but even through the chains where they did manage to come back closer on the scoreboard, I feel North Melbourne looked the better team from start to finish. They held the momentum from start to finish. Just little tiny bursts where the Bulldogs find themselves getting back into the game. But unfortunately, it was all for naught. At quarter time, North Melbourne led 6 goals straight, 36 to 2-3-15. They led 10-2-62 to 5-6-36 at halftime. At 3-quarter time, they led 12-7-79 to 10-9-69, which was the closest gap that they managed to bring the game back within. But the final scoreline saw North Melbourne 15-10-100 defeat the Bulldogs 11-11-77. Now, as I said, even though there were some stat lines that the Bulldogs won in this game, North Melbourne just looked the better team, the most focused. They were more prepared to win the hard ball. This was a performance that I think North Melbourne needed, not just for the win, but to solidify that they are moving in a positive direction. They had a really good start to the year, but they've dropped off over the last month or two, and I think they needed a little bit of reconfirmation that they've got the pieces in place and they can make the right moves, and they can finally find a little bit of cohesiveness and pick up a win. And that's exactly what happened here. And while the Bulldogs won the inside 50 count in this game 59-49, they only recorded 9 marks inside 50, whereas North Melbourne generated 19 marks from their 49 entries and scored only 27% of the time they went inside. North Melbourne scoring 43% of the time they went inside. Not only that, but they also conceded 9 defensive 50 intercept marks, which is their third highest tally of conceding for the season. So, plenty of opportunity inside 50, but giving the ball up a lot of the time as you know, one of the most, you know, highest intercept games they coughed up for the season. And North Melbourne winning the clearance game against the Bulldogs, I think, just helps set this game up. Winning the clearance 42-33, and from this particular chain, they scored 8 goals 5 from clearance, whereas the Bulldogs only managed 3 goals 5. It's their third highest return, respectively, for North Melbourne for the season as well. And winning first possession when it comes to centre clearance, 16-9 in the centre clearance, and winning the count by 10 for first ball, you know, hands on ball and getting the ball moving and getting those chains set up. It was a comprehensive midfield beatdown from North Melbourne, and that's not hard to boast. Well, not easy to boast, rather, given the fact that you're coming up against Marcus Bontempelli, Ed Richards, Tom Liberatore. This is a in and out bona fide clearance machine at the Bulldogs with the midfield group that they've got, and they got absolutely dismantled. Let's break down the team statistics, because North Melbourne did have plenty more of the ball. We got a little bit more return and bang for your buck out of the Bulldogs, given the fact that they lost the disposal count 351-418, but did manage 10 more inside 50s, 59-49. But running at only 33.9% efficiency inside 50 collectively, just dismantled any chance that the Bulldogs had to win this game. Now again, I feel, even though the free kick count for this game sits at 21-17, the way of the Bulldogs, North Melbourne could not buy a holding the ball free kick all night if they tried. If they walked up to the umpires with $1 million in a briefcase and said, fucking pay a holding the ball call, it was not going to happen. And that is one call that has been adjudicated the most poorly this year, I feel anyway, and very much so in the way of one team being called holding the ball perfectly fine and the other team not. And that's going to be a growing trend over the course of this weekend, because it wasn't just this game, but Melbourne Fremantle, Adelaide Richmond, GWS Gold Coast. There was one team that would get the better rub when it came to holding the ball, and another team that should have had a lot paid but didn't get anything given to them. And I just think it is a ridiculous concept that a rule that has been within the game for years and years and years can be adjudicated 2 different ways dependent on the jumper that you're wearing. And you can feel free to disagree. You can think I'm just some moron carrying on like an idiot. Feel free to have any opinions you want about it. But the stark reality is we have more umpires on the field than we have in recent years. We've been given a lot more rules to adjudicate than we have in recent years. And I think what is breaking down the most is, while we've increased in number in umpire size, we keep giving brand new rules to implement when they're not knuckling down the rules we've already got. And it just makes for worse viewing, regardless of whether you're a North fan, a Bulldogs fan, Fremantle, Melbourne, Adelaide, Richmond, or just a neutral watching a game. You hate to see good games of football absolutely destroyed because the adjudication is so heavily skewed one way. And while the numbers here only suggest that there were 5 more free kicks paid, or 4 more free kicks rather, paid on the night to the Bulldogs, it's about those not paid that is the most damning. And if that means that a free kick count blows out to 30 apiece, so be it. We need to start having a game where collectively people are adjudicated properly, teams are adjudicated properly, there is an even spread, and we stop getting a sour taste left in our mouths because one team, despite all the efforts of trying does not get given the same concessions and be rewarded like another team does. That's just my take. Around the stoppage, North Melbourne were the better team on the night, 43-25 in the way of hitouts, 42-33 in the way of clearances. Their biggest gap was at the centre clearance, where I mentioned before, 16-9, where out of those 16 clearances, they managed to get their hands on the ball 10 more times first than what the Bulldogs were able to. It was the uncontested possession of North Melbourne that was a little bit of undoing as well, which you can chop up to the intercept marks that they made inside defensive 50, 264 to 216. And again, with the mark tally, 109 marks taken by North Melbourne, only 67 managed by the Bulldogs on the night. Inside 50s, we touched on it before, 19 marks inside 50 to 9, 10 of those contested, with the Bulldogs only managing 6 contested marks around the ground, and both teams managing over 60 tackles for the game, so the pressure was up. 13 of those tackles from the Bulldogs were inside 50 to 9 for North Melbourne, but again, it was just a game where ultimately the Bulldogs shot themselves in the foot. They had more looks inside 50, they just failed to generate any score. They coughed up the ball defensively and allowed easy intercept marks. Not only that, but being able to practically at times walk the ball out of defensive 50 and just set up a counter-attack. And obviously the potency that they got out of their forward line. Because the likes of Paul Curtis, even midfielders like Luke Davies-Uniacke were getting off the chain and kicking goals. Could have been a lot better if they kicked straighter, because it would have been a game where they could have set a little bit of percentage underneath them as well, because that's what's going to play the most important factor moving forward with the wildcard configuration now being a thing. But ultimately, as I said, North Melbourne, the better on the night, getting a jump on a midfield that they probably... I'm probably discrediting North Melbourne's midfield, but when you have a look at the people that they're playing against, the Bulldogs should have had the jump on them through that midfield core, and North Melbourne made them look absolutely silly, which is unfortunate, because Ed Richards still had a highly rated game. Marcus Bontempelli still had a high rated game, but underneath that and underneath those two, there was a huge gap, and it's just all North Melbourne players listed. So when it came to the votes, it was easy to pick out the 1, 2, 3, because I feel the 3 kangaroos that I'm going for were the 3 that truly set this win up for them from the get-go. The one vote I'm giving to Paul Curtis. There's a joke going around by, I can't remember who said it on commentary, but they basically said the only person that could stop Paul Curtis was Michael Christian through the MRO, and he was absolutely on fire, this bloke. He just, when he's up and about, he's one of the best small to mid-sized forwards in the competition. My personal take. 19 disposals, 8 were contested, 4 marks, 4 tackles, 1 clearance, 328 metres gained, 4 goals, and 7 score involvements. The 2 vote I gave to Harry Sheezel. Always up and about when North Melbourne are winning games. 29 disposals, 9 were contested, 7 marks, 6 tackles, 1 clearance, 278 metres gained, 12 score involvements. You'll see at the back end of this video that Harry Sheezel has been polling well from myself as a neutral that can look at stats and watches every game and kind of just puts input on how I feel a player has performed. Does he have any chance of not just finishing in the top 10 for the Brownlow this year, but could he push top 5? Or does the fact that North Melbourne hasn't won enough games this year not quantify that many votes? Feel free to let me know down below. But best on ground was Luke Davies-Uniacke. This bloke basically turned around and said to North Melbourne, jump on my back and I'll carry you to the finish line. This guy was huge. 31 disposals, 17 contested, 3 marks, 10 tackles, 10 clearances, 543 metres gained, 2 goals, 11 score involvements. What did we learn out of this? Well, thankfully for the Bulldogs, due to other things that happened over the course of this weekend, they cannot fall out of wildcard round. So despite losing to North Melbourne, they will at least feature in the wildcard round before final starts. And if you're unfamiliar with how that works, normally we just dive straight in, all the finals teams play against each other. But this year, the top 6 is safe, but 7, 8, 9, and 10 need to play off against each other in 1 week to determine who effectively finishes 7th and 8th, and then we get finals going. So the Bulldogs can finish 9th or 10th, but if they win their wildcard game, they're featuring in finals the following week. So they've locked themselves up for that opportunity. For North Melbourne, They've just come out and proven, again, that they are on the right track. The one thing that has let them down this year is continuity and the late fade outs with defensive pressure. But when you've got a team that has so many young kids running about, even though in the moment right now, short-sightedness and short-term, they're going to suffer for that, long-term, it's going to make them better because they now know what it feels like to be in that pressure situation. It's only going to help harden them as players. But for now, they remain, at least mathematically, in touch, I think. We'll look at the ladder later and we'll determine that. But that game's now done. Let's move on to the next. I've said it over a few videos over the course of this year, and I'll say it again. When it comes to unpacking games, sometimes, unfortunately, one team is just so dominant over the other that there's not really much to deep dive into because the scoreline is blown out of proportion. Statistically, teams are better, and it's just a case of touching on what happened and we move on. But if you had told me that this particular week would feature Hawthorn on the back end of an absolute smacking and being able to gloss over a Hawthorn game, I would have told you you were absolutely crazy. Especially given the fact it was at the hands of Brisbane, who got absolutely towed up against Carlton 2 weeks ago and were in the same boat. But at the Gabba on Friday night, it was Brisbane by the tune of 67 points, dismantling Hawthorn, bringing them down to earth, humbling them a little bit in a game that at quarter time looked like we were going to get a very hard-fought contest. But after that, the trajectory that Brisbane ran on just kept on sending them higher and higher and higher. And for those that wanted to argue that Brisbane can't win the grand final this year because of the losses that they have accumulated this season, coming out and doing this against a team that has every right to be within a premiership conversation, I think that just puts them well back into conversation again. At quarter time, Brisbane led 2-3-15 to 1-3-9. At halftime, they led 8-8-56 to 4-4-28. At three-quarter time, they led 13-12-90 to 6-8-44. And the final scoreline saw Brisbane 18-17, 125. Defeat Hawthorn 8-10, 58. Let's just dive straight into the team statistics here. I don't think there were any injuries out of this game. No, there weren't. For some reason, I thought there was. But this game, they got injured all right. They beat on the Hawks, and I think all of them walked off limping. In a game where they had 50-odd more disposals, 394 to 349. Close enough to it. 260 kicks to 190. Hawthorn having the better of the handball game, 159 to 134. 67 points the difference, 15 inside 50 is the difference, 65 to 50 the way of Brisbane. Brisbane running at 61% efficiency inside, which is well up on their seasonal average, and Hawthorn well down on their seasonal average, only running at 42% with an average of 53. In the stoppage, it was Hawthorn that had the better, and we have seen this stat line many times this year, where a team can get smacked around the park, but when it comes to stoppage, they were the better team. 40 hitouts to 26, 43 clearances to 32. The biggest gap was 7 in stoppage, 27 to 20. However, uncontested game, contested game, all won by Brisbane. They turned the ball over almost 20 times less. Marking around the ground, they took 109 marks, which was just shy of their seasonal average. But Hawthorn, who love to mark and kind of set their game up, averaging 99 marks a game this year, only managing 78 marks for the game. 11 of those were inside 50, and only 7 were contested, whereas Brisbane managed 16 marks inside 50 and 15 contested marks around the ground. 50 tackles to 49 the way of Brisbane, 13 of those were inside 50. So the inside 50 pressure that Brisbane keep bringing to the game through the likes of Kai Lohmann, through Cam Rayner, through Charlie Cameron, through these smaller to middle-sized players that are just fleet-footed and just apply as much pressure as they can, and not just always actual pressure, but perceived pressure. Just being able to impact the game in a way that forces turnover, being able to then set their teammates up to score. This was the Brisbane that we have seen win the last 2 premierships. It was all built on intercept game from defensive 50, setting up the run and carry launch, their midfielders getting to work even though they lost the clearance battle, their midfielders had huge impact, and then forward half of the ball, if Logan Morris wasn't swallowing it and having shots, Kai Lohmann was stepping up. Charlie Cameron was causing problems. Cam Rayner was throwing his weight around. Zach Bailey didn't have the biggest game, but he does tend to disappear sometimes, but he did have a little bit of impact when he had ball in hand. Eric Hipwood, 2 weeks ago, was played out of defence against Carlton and was made to look like an absolute idiot. They send him forward half again, and he was causing headaches for Hawthorn. He slot a goal from like 60 metres out as if it was nobody's business, and this was, as I just said, Brisbane back to their best. And what's most alarming from a Hawthorn perspective is Hawthorn were as fit and complete of a unit by players picked that we have seen in a very long time. And comparatively, Brisbane had players out that could easily be coming back into their best 22. So Brisbane yet to get better from the team that took this game, and they still won by 67 points. I think some people have been put on notice in this game. When it comes to votes, I feel Logan Morris was the one that is probably stiffed the most out of this, because he had a lot of impact in this game, and that'll be reflected in Team of the Week. And again, next year, I'll be shifting from a 3-2-1 Brownlow style voting to a 5-4-3-2-1 coaches vote kind of deal, so then we can rein in an extra couple of players and just spread the love a little bit more. But the three I chose, again, similar to the last game, very impactful when they had the ball. One vote I'm giving to Kai Lohmann. This guy, I think he's out of contract at the end of the year. There are teams that are interested in him. As a Richmond man, I would love to land a Kai Lohmann at the club, because not only is it the direct impact he can have on the scoreboard himself, but the ability to bring teammates into the game is absolutely incredible with this bloke. He had 24 disposals, 8 contested, 5 marks, 3 tackles, 2 clearances, 450 metres gained, 5 goals, 1 goal assist, and 9 score involvements. The 2 votes I gave to Will Ashcroft. At the back end of finals last year, when he won the Norm Smith, and when, he looked like an absolute champion during that finals run, I said if he can put a season proper together in a home and away season with that kind of continuity and an explosiveness, he would assert himself amongst the best midfielders in the competition. And since round 16, I believe he is the 4th ranked player in the comp, or at least midfielders. And he had an absolute outing in this game as well. It's just a shame that, for now at least, he has too much competition when it comes to Brisbane players getting votes for Brownlow contention. But I feel he's had a huge year this year. I definitely think he's in All-Australian talks. In this outing, 39 disposals, 15 contested, 6 marks, 2 tackles, 7 clearances, 486 metres gained, 1 goal assist, 13 score involvements, and best on ground, I thought, was Lachie Neale. In a game where they lost that centre clearance, but he was able to still have as much impact as he had, was huge. 35 disposals, 17 contested, 7 marks, 9 tackles, 6 clearances, 529 metres gained, 3 goal assists, 10 score involvements. What did we learn? I feel Hawthorn here are on fraud watch, I think, just a little bit, because if they're going full tilt with a full complement of players here, and they got absolutely dog-walked by Brisbane, who got absolutely smacked the week before, maybe it's just poor timing, and they came up against a Brisbane team that had a chip on their shoulder and something to prove. But I feel Brisbane now have reasserted themselves back in premiership conversation, whereas Hawthorn has taken a stepwards back. Maybe, just a little bit. Maybe I'm not giving him as much credit as due course, but in a game where they won stoppage convincingly, they just coughed the ball up everywhere else, and Brisbane just picked them apart so meticulously. Hawthorn have the best defense, in my eyes, in the competition. Logan Morris single-handedly made them look stupid, not without Kai Lohmann kicking 5, and the other forwards absolutely popping off. Absolute dismantling. Brisbane back on top. Hawthorn could finish in the top 4, but we could potentially see 2 weeks in a row out, straight sets. Could it happen? If they play like this, definitely on the cards. Saturday kicked off at the MCG. Melbourne, Fremantle. I was there live. The first game I've been able to catch live this year, and it lived up to the hype. This is easily one of, if not the best games of the year, which again, I feel was marred by adjudication and not being on an even keel when it came to adjudicating holding the ball. There were many instances through this game where Fremantle would tackle Melbourne, and there's one particular instance, and I posted it on social media. There was one instance and one chain where Fremantle laid 3 or 4 tackles and the Melbourne players either threw the ball out or dropped it completely. The umpire calls play on, play on, play on. As soon as Fremantle in that same chain got possession and were tackled instantly, holding the ball paid to Melbourne. And I don't know whether it is the home team being looked after the most. I don't know whether they, there's, for the tinfoil hat conspiracists out there, I don't know whether, Melbourne finishing in the top 6 and playing in finals this year is something the AFL wants, if you want to go down that route. But there were a lot of instances in this game where Fremantle caught a Melbourne player dead to rights, throwing the ball, trying to get rid of it, missing the boot or the hand completely, and it was play on. But then the opposite. Melbourne would tackle somebody straight away, no prior, holding the ball. Or some very soft free kicks, like just being brushed. Just being brushed in a contest. Free kick. And I just think it took the sting out of what was a brilliant game of football. The timeline, it was up and down. And I rode the momentum throughout this game, and just listening to the crowd, I just love being at live games. Nothing in my mind beats the sensation of a packed out MCG and just riding the wave of the crowd throughout, the highs and the lows. At quarter time, we had a dead even game, 5-2-32 apiece. At halftime, Fremantle went in with a very slim lead, 11-2-68 to 10-5-65. At three-quarter time, a slim lead to Fremantle once more, 14-4-88 to 12-8-80. And the final scoreline saw Melbourne 17-11-113 defeat Fremantle 17-7-109. In a 5-goal final term, Fremantle walk away with it. And although Melbourne lost the inside 50 count by 1 in that final quarter, they retained 29% more of their entries comparatively to what Fremantle did, just being able to lock it down into their forward half and give themselves those secondary and third chances again. And they scored from 17% more of their final quarter entries than Fremantle did. Fremantle had every opportunity to win and didn't. A total score of 222 between these teams surpasses Melbourne's average total score of 189.8 per game this season. This is the number 2 ranked game in the comp this year on way of total score. It was a high scoring. As soon as they both scored over 60 at halftime, I knew straight away this was going to be 100 plus points either side. It was high scoring. It was high intensity. The tackle numbers were up. It is just a shame once more that Fremantle, for all their pressure around the contest, were not getting given the reward of the free kick. Now, some people would argue that a free kick isn't a reward. It's it's the opposition conceding the free kick, so it's a penalty. But when you have as much tackle pressure around the contest that Fremantle did, and all these dropping the ball calls that weren't called, especially late in the game when the ball was to be won and the game was to be had, not to mention, with a minute left, there was still plenty of time for Fremantle to go coast to coast and win the game. And Bailey Fritsch marks the ball out of bounds, and the umpires definitively turn around and say it's a mark. They don't even go up to the arc to see if it's gone out of bounds. They let him have a shot on goal. He takes his 30, he milks the clock. Fremantle, they'll be filthy. They'll be absolutely filthy. Fremantle won the centre clearance count 43-32. But they lost the post-clearance contested possessions by 34. So they were getting the clearance out, but Melbourne were getting first hand on ball outside of that clearance. And I feel that was the biggest turning point for them. They weren't getting return for their effort. And you can argue the adjudication of the calls as much as we want. When they were getting first hands on it and they just couldn't generate anything from that, it's just an unfortunate circumstance, and that's the undoing. It gets further compacted by adjudication, I feel, at least from a personal standpoint. Again, you can feel free to disagree. They average 5.3 more post-clearance contested possessions than their opponents this year. So to lose that count by 34, when they're ranked first in the competition for that particular stat line. It just shows that the level that Melbourne played at in this game. They also lost the contested possession count by 24 and ground balls by 19. So again, Melbourne were just up to the task. Fremantle were primed for the rebound all game. And just being able to see how they set that rebound up live and not seeing what you see on TV, you can see why their run and carry game is so incredibly strong. They always had one or two players a little bit further back from the contest, so if they got that run and carry ball going, they had the easy outlet, and that's where they were getting a lot of their scores from in this game. However, when they were coughing it up as much as they were, that was getting shut down. They were getting ready for that counter punch, but then players like CJ standing up for defence in Melbourne, I thought he had a huge game for Melbourne in this particular outing. Just intercepting, setting the ball up and rebounding, they were quick to click onto it. They knew what Fremantle wanted to do, and they set the pieces in motion to make sure it didn't happen that way. It was good. It was great. It was comprehensive. But in a game, as I said, that falls by 4, statistically is so strong. Melbourne had 10 more free kicks for the game. And I said there were some very soft calls that went Melbourne's way. But the fact that there were so many holding the ball calls that went awry for Fremantle, you can't help but feel for them. 323 to 322 disposals respectively. Just the way of Melbourne. 56 inside 50s to 51, just the way of Melbourne. In the stoppage, Fremantle won the hitouts 40 to 34. They won the clearance 43 to 32. But again, all of that work was undone by the fact that while they got, those clearances, they weren't getting their hands to the ball following that. Melbourne were able to chop it off and move it on. Contested ball was won by Melbourne. The uncontested ball was won by Fremantle, but Fremantle turned it over 60 times. Melbourne only coughed it up 45. Around the ground, 91 marks to 67, the way of Fremantle, hitting their seasonal average. 15 marks inside 50 to 14, 12 contested to 6. So around the ground, they were finding hands on it. 68 tackles to 59, the way of Melbourne. 16 tackles inside 50 to 6, which is where I feel another gap was put on. We're used to seeing Fremantle's forwards put so much pressure on forward half, but they just failed to do that in this game, and Melbourne were the ones that switched it on. But again, all that tackling that Fremantle did was almost going unrecognised and unrewarded, and I feel that just leaves a stain on a game that is just so incredible. And I know it sounds like I'm having a sook, right? I'm a neutral supporter. I don't follow Fremantle, and I don't follow North Melbourne, so it's not like I'm coming from an angle of a sourpuss supporter whose team got done by harshly, and we'll get to that point when we talk about the Adelaide Richmond game, don't get me wrong, but Fremantle here, I just feel for all the effort they had around the contest, even though, they weren't getting hands to it outside of the clearance, and statistically they were a worst team in some aspects, and Melbourne deserved to win this game. Don't take me wrong at all. Melbourne perfectly executed what they wanted to and got the job done in the end, but I just feel this game, for everything it delivered, would have been so much better if it just felt from a neutral standpoint that both teams were being adjudicated the same way. Just my take on it personally. When we have a look at the votes for this particular game, I actually had a bit of a rough time picking out the 1 and 2 vote, especially the 2 vote, because the 3 vote to me was clear. I did land on 1 vote to Patrick Voss. I thought just his ability to hit the scoreboard when Tracy and Amiss were kind of struggling early, I feel he set the tone for Fremantle throughout the game whenever he scored. Just his personality is so large, and being able to witness that live for the first time, there's no denying why they call him the prancing pony. 10 disposals, 3 contested, 5 marks, 2 tackles, 332 metres gained, 4 goals, 1 goal assist, 6 score involvements. I did land on Caleb Sarong for the 2 vote, because I thought when it came to clearance game, when it come to tackle pressure, this bloke epitomised it throughout this game. And I just feel, again, for all the work he was putting in to get Fremantle over the line, it just sucks to see them not get the reward for all that pressure that they were bringing to the contest. But he had 21 disposals, 8 were contested, 10 tackles, 7 clearances, 409 metres gained, 2 goal assists, and 7 score involvements. And best on was Cozzy Pickett. I've been harsh on him because I feel the gap between his worst and his best is huge. And he's an elite player. But when he's off his game, It's so blatantly obvious how bad he can be. But when he's up and about like this, and just seeing all the work he does off the ball to put himself in prime position each and every time is incredible. And as somebody who loves footy as much as I do, to be able to finally go back to a live game again and see just how these players move and they set up the situations that they find themselves in. It's a lot more eye-opening than watching a game of football on the television, because you're always constantly seeing the stoppage and the flow of the ball. You don't see behind the scenes, setting up for the next play, conducting where other players go. It's just incredible. And he is so smart. His footy IQ, I feel, is very underrated off the ball. 27 disposals, 9 were contested, 3 marks, 6 tackles, 2 clearances, 458 metres gained, 2 goals, 3 goal assists, 13 score involvements. What did we learn? The biggest question that now hangs over Fremantle's head is, can they win the premiership if they can't win at the MCG? Now, this was a close game, and it was a game of the year contender, and a game where I argue, at least, and many neutrals argued, that Fremantle got the rough end of the stick of adjudication. I don't know whether finals falls that way. And if finals is ran the way that one team gets favoured over the other, people are going to be it's going to be riots, I'm telling you right now. But I feel the biggest question mark now looms is for Fremantle is that, can they win the premiership, being the fact that they're going to have to run through the MCG at one point in order to do so. They're still the number 1 team in the comp. Their system is still the number 1 system in the comp. It's just a matter of getting it back in check. And, you know, they failed to do it against Melbourne here. Teams are now cluing on. Do they have a plan B? Biggest question, I feel. For Melbourne, I think they put themselves right in the conversation, and I feel out of the top 6 right now, Melbourne are the ones that aren't taken as seriously as contenders. Because we're talking about Adelaide, Geelong, Hawthorn, Brisbane, Sydney, Fremantle, these types of teams. Can they cause some damage through September? With how they played in this game, I definitely think they can. And as far as top 6 goes, I think Melbourne are the dark horse. If they can get themselves to a preliminary final position, and they have a series where they run through the MCG, they could do the most damage, because they've only dropped 1 this year at the MCG. Outside of that, it's been them walking away with the win every single time. And if they can set themselves up on just an MCG run through September, holy shit, we could see Stephen King in his first year crowned a premiership coach, and how big would that be? We then head on up to the SCG, in a game where Sydney played host to Port Adelaide. Now, these two teams faced off earlier this year, and there were 2 weeks in a row where Sydney escaped with very narrow wins against St Kilda and Port Adelaide. So we know Port Adelaide are up to the task, albeit without Zach Butters in this lineup. However, we spoke about it last week, and we'll speak about it today as well. Without Zach Butters in this team, they have still showed fight, they have showed grit, they have shown a willingness to win contested ball, to try different things, to move those chains. And I was truly expecting this game to only go 5 goals the way of Sydney at most. I thought this was going to be a hell of a lot more competitive than what it was. But it was Sydney by 97 points in the end, in an absolute blow-up. This, I think, just shows the gap between a true contender and a bottom 4, bottom 5 type team like Port Adelaide right now. And I still maintain that without Zach Butters in this lineup, moving forward, whether he goes to Richmond, whether he goes to now Collingwood being heavily spoken about in the way of offering him a club-defining contract. We know Bulldogs are still in the hunt. We know Geelong might offer him a Cotton On sponsorship and maybe a farm out in the Geelong hinterlands. But wherever he goes, I don't think he's staying at Port Adelaide. And I think Port Adelaide need to start focusing on how they're going to play without him. And the last few weeks since Zach Butters has been injured has been a great example of that, because as I've just mentioned, we've seen some fight, some spirit, some willingness to want to win, and it just all disappeared in this game. It was a complete undoing, it was a complete unraveling, and it was the perfect game for Sydney to truly demonstrate that people need to be putting respect on their name. Because when they lose, it's easy to say that they're not in contention, but when they win, as emphatically as they do here, it is hard to argue against the systems that Dean Cox has put in place for these boys. And at quarter time, it looked like we had a great game on our hands. Port Adelaide led 3-4-22 to 3-2-20. And then after that, it was just a complete blow up. It was 5-6-36 trailing 12-6-78 at halftime. 16-7-103 led 6-8-44 at three-quarter time, and 26-11 167 defeated 10-10-70. They kicked 9 goals in the second term. They only kicked 4 in the third term, but went on to kick 10 in the final quarter. This, and you could argue that it was dead rubber by then, and it was just easy goals that were surmounting, but some teams, sometimes when you get a big lead, especially some of these top contending teams, and we've seen this historically from different teams over different years, they'll get complacent with the lead they've got, they'll take their foot off the gas, and that's when the opposition creeps back in. But this was a game that Sydney kept their foot pedal to the metal the entire game, and they know that these, percentage boosting wins are going to hold them in better stead, not just on the ladder, but just for continuity to their game, to, building some belief, some chemistry, some motivation, some driving factor. They kicked 9 goals from centre clearances in this particular outing, Sydney, and that's the most by any team in the last 10 years. 10 years. It was a decade-defining game. They recorded 20 to 15 centre clearances, and from those centre clearances, they scored 10 goals. Or 9 goals, sorry. Absolutely insane. Almost half of the centre clearances they got resulted in a direct goal. They were just so efficient through that midfield. Since round 18, Port Adelaide have lost the uncontested possession count by an average of 64.3 disposals per game. And they are ranked 17th in the competition for that fact. In this particular game, they were outbeaten by 72, more than their seasonal average. It's something that they have struggled in without Zach Butters in the team. And Jason Horne-Francis copped a bit of a knock in this game, so he was gone for a piece, and that is okay. But they need to really start assessing Port Adelaide, how they're going to go about it without Zach Butters. They do have Connor Rozee to come back, but does he still play that halfback kind of quarterback role? Does he come back into the midfield again? Do they focus on bulking Horne-Francis up to be their driving factor? While they've been competitive in some games, the blowout here suggests that the gap between is too insurmountable, and they need to make some serious moves, because there are whispers that the likes of Mitch Georgiades could be on the out, that Todd Marshall could be looking elsewhere, and we know that potentially in a couple of years, Nasiah Wanganeen-Malira might team up with Jace Burgoyne and head to Port Adelaide, and that would suit Port Adelaide incredibly well, given he would be getting midfield time like he should be at St Kilda, but he isn't getting permanently. But they've got to do something in the meantime, because with Tasmania knocking on the door, it could see an exit of a few, which would be damning. Turning attention more to some stat lines though, 167 points put on the board by Sydney is their biggest score against Port Adelaide in the history of these two clubs going together. They scored from 56% of their forward 50 entries, which is their best conversion rate of the season, with Chad Warner recording a game-high 13 score involvements and 3 goals. And again, some of those goals might have been in dead time, but the fact that they just kept going and kept pushing, and they could have stopped, they could have slowed down, they could have taken players off the field and rested them, but they just went full throttle, and that is what you love to see at this point of the season, especially coming into finals. You want to take as much momentum as you can. Let's dive into the team stats here. Very one-sided. The inside 50 count, not as big of a blowout as you would expect given the scoreline, but Sydney did lead 425 disposals to 339. Their biggest gap was in handballs, 219 to 142. We know they love the handball game. Fremantle do it best. Sydney this season, I feel, have done it second best behind that fact, but the sword that they fall on is they don't have a plan B. When that handballing game doesn't work, they get caught out. They over-handball, they turn over, but this game, unfortunately, was just one that they moved it with so much ease and not much pressure around the contest at all. 63 to 50 inside 50s. They only had 13 more inside 50s for the game, but they won by 97 points. They kicked 26 goals. That is a ridiculous return. In the stoppage, Port Adelaide dominated the ruck. Now, Brodie Grundy was out for this game. So obviously Brodie Grundy coming back into this team who kicked 160 odd points makes them infinitely greater. But they lost the stoppage count with hitouts 47 to 27. But they did win the clearance battle 41 to 38. So despite the dominance, the midfield of Port Adelaide was still able to get on top around the contest. So you can take that out as a win. But the uncontested possessions, they had 72 more. And they just made them look, in part, without wanting to be so harsh, made them look insipid around the contest. They were able to just get the handball game chaining and just work their way so confidently through the Port Adelaide players that they were just able to transition so seamlessly, so perfectly, incredibly well drilled. 86 to 83 marks, 21 marks inside 50. Sydney took. They've been averaging 13 for the season. That is huge. And even though they had so much more disposal, 61 to 42 tackles. Incredible. It blows my mind that teams can have a gap of almost 100 disposals and they still lay more tackles in a game. It just shows the pressure that Sydney were bringing. They just did not stop. Were there any injuries of note in this game? I want to make sure there wasn't. There was. Horne-Francis did the knee that we've spoken about before, but I believe he escaped major injury, so it's nothing to really worry about too much if you're a Port Adelaide fan, thankfully, because if you've lost Butters and then you go to lose Horne-Francis, you'd be in the wars. You wouldn't be happy about it, but obviously, given the blowout, 97 points, it was hard to justify giving any votes to Port Adelaide players. Despite Jace Burgoyne, I think, having a great game for Port Adelaide, I did land on one vote to Jai Sarong. I feel he has been a bargain recruit this year for Sydney. Couldn't get a game at Hawthorn, but has absolutely blitzed it, and I feel he would fit in Hawthorn's lineup currently so incredibly well, and I feel they fumbled letting him go. 24 disposals, 9 contested, 3 marks, 11 tackles, 3 clearances, 343 metres gained, 1 goal assist, 8 score involvements. The 2 vote goes to Errol Goulden, has just found his feet since coming back in. 39 disposals, 8 contested, 5 marks, 4 tackles, 5 clearances, 608 metres gained, 1 goal, 3 goal assists, and 11 score involvements. And best on, we touched on him before, I thought it was hard to argue against Chad Warner. 24 disposals, 9 contested, 5 marks, 4 tackles, 5 clearances, 468 metres gained, 3 goals, 1 goal assist, and 13 score involvements. What did we learn? I think we've already spoken about it. Sydney are well and truly in the hunt, and you'd be stupid to write them off. With Port Adelaide licking their wounds, we know where they're going to end up this year. We know their best is still competitive. But if they lose players at the end of this year, in the end of next year, are they going to be good enough to maintain competitiveness, or are we going to see Port Adelaide start going on a slump that a lot of people are expecting? It's going to be one to watch. The blowouts continued, and we go down to GMHBA Stadium, where Geelong took on Essendon in a game where I think many expected this outcome. Geelong by 67 points in the end, and unfortunately, it's just... And I posted about this on social media, and people have taken it the wrong way. I still just feel fixturing, especially at the back end of the year with clubs that are fighting for top 4, top 6, top 8. I think it's still a little bit ludicrous that some of these clubs are getting dished up the lower end of the table teams. And I know in fixturing you can't ever anticipate where teams are going to be fixtured, but that is where my personal plan for fixturing change could work, right? 18 teams, soon to be 19, so you make it the first 19 games of the season, you play off against every team once. Then for the last 5 games of the year, you play people within your configuration. Top 6 play against top 6, or top 8 against top 8, and then the bottom 10 or 9, 11, they play against... You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? I know it's going to be hard because Tasmania coming in means there is going to be a guaranteed bye each and every week with one team missing out. But to have teams like Geelong, who are going to finish in top 4 because they have been given Richmond, North Melbourne and Essendon in successive weeks to finish the year, when other clubs like Melbourne have had to beat Fremantle at the line to lock up that top 6 spot, I think is a bit rough. I think it's a bit uneven. And we talk about equalisation, I think fairness should creep in a little bit. But that might be asking too much of the AFL. That does mean there needs to be a floating fixture, but at least we're not seeing floating fixture after floating fixture after floating fixture. I don't know. Feel free to argue that. But we knew Essendon was going to fall. Unfortunately, been very uncompetitive this year, outside of that upset win against GWS we saw a few weeks ago, where they looked incredible. But that Essendon has dropped off so much so ever since. And again, many talking about how Essendon have been the most unwatchable team this year. Could injury be hampering them? I definitely feel Nick Martin makes them a different team. I think he adds a little bit of dynamic. But when they're paying players like Ben Mackay, for example, $800,000 or whatever it is a year, and he can't even get a game in this team because he's been terrible, I think there's going to be more questions than there are answers. And I personally am on the take that if they hire James Hird as their coach, they're stepping backwards. They're living in, they're choosing to live in nostalgia instead of wanting to truly set themselves up on a successful pathway to moving forward. But alas, the match timeline, let's break it down. It was Geelong 4-5-29 to 4 behinds at quarter time, 10-9-69, it led 2-4-16 at half time, 13-11-89 led 6-7-43 at 3/4 time, and 17-15 117 was the final gap amongst 7-8-50. I've got to give credit where it is due. Dyson Sharp has been incredible for Essendon, even in these beatdowns. A career-high 27 disposals, 14 contested, 7 clearances, 7 tackles. Was huge. But when you have performances like that in a team that gets belted, you constantly get overshadowed. And it's so incredibly rough. Because this guy's come into this club, brought in as many arguing as the most AFL-ready recruit from the last draft pool. And it's just been marred in defeat and darkness, and I just feel bad for some of these kids at Essendon. As a Richmond man, seeing them knocked from pillar to post when my own club is going through the same, I do feel for them. No injuries in this game, thankfully. Just licking the proverbial wounds from the scoreboard. Turning attention to the team stats wasn't as comprehensive again. A beatdown. 359 to 303 by disposal, 55 inside 50s to 44, only 11 more. Essendon were getting good looks, they were just failing to convert. Inside 50 they ran at 40%, Geelong ran at 61. The hitouts, Essendon won 53 to 35, and they only conceded, and it might be a big number, but 12 less clearances, but 48 to 36, that's still up on their seasonal average. They smashed their seasonal average in hitouts. The big gap was in centre clearances, where Geelong dominated 17 to 6. In possession, they only just lost the contested ball, 140 to 126. The uncontested ball, 198 to 161. But they turned the ball over 7 more times and they were put to the sword. Took 51 marks for the game. They averaged 89, so they weren't getting hands to ball. Geelong averaged 91. They only took 77, but they got great return from the number they had, and that is what sometimes it breaks down to, the quality from the quantity you're getting. While they didn't have a huge number of disposals more, they were getting more potent looks inside 50, they were cleaner with ball in hand, they were just using everything they had at their disposal so much more incredibly well than what Essendon did. And unfortunately, whether it comes down to a lack of leadership and breakdown on the field, whether it's just these young kids for Essendon still needing time to develop, it's killing the fan base. It's killing the fan base. They go into these games with so much hope and they come out of it wondering what next. Now, while at the start of the year I made the bold call saying I thought Richmond would win more games this season than Essendon, I did not anticipate Essendon would be in line for the wooden spoon, the number 1 pick overall. Is this strategy from Essendon? I'm not at all suggesting tanking, but, they knock off GWS as comfortably as they did, but they can't be competitive elsewhere, so you got to ask the question sometimes. And the tinfoil hats come back out, and the conspiracy theories can start spinning, but are they playing for that number 1 pick? Who are they going to take with it? And that now puts Richmond in a different seat as well, because we could have lost against West Coast 2 weeks ago and kept that number 1 pick. Is that going to be used to try to secure Zach Butters? Are we going to get Van Hutton, the generational ruckman everyone's talking about? Is the gap between the first and best available player too big between the best and then second best? It's going to be an interesting watch. I bleed for Essendon. You know, they've been through so much, and while one of my good friends is an Essendon supporter and we poke fun and talk shit to each other all the time, I know how bad it feels going in with all the confidence in the world and then having just the sting and all the enjoyment sapped out of the game so incredibly quickly. And unfortunately, I don't think it's going to get any better anytime soon. And again, I point to James Hird. If they appoint James Hird, they're not going to... I'm telling you right now, they appoint James Hird as coach, I'm going on record. They appoint James Hird, they will still be a bottom 4 team next year. Comfortably. And they're not going to win many more games than they have this year. They need something fresh. I personally am on the take of they should be looking at somebody like James Kelly. Stephen King has just come out of the same coaching pool, learning under who he has learnt from. Get him over to Melbourne and have a look at what they're doing in his first year. Like, you know, it's not hard. You don't need to be a seasoned coach. You don't need to have experience. And let's not forget, James Hird kind of led them off a cliff during sagas that we won't talk about right now, but there's some questionable decision-making from his first time around, and I don't understand how some people might think it's going to change the second time around. But Geelong, they did what they needed to do. Top 4 spot, you can't help the fixturing. They need to beat up on these teams. They're going to beat up on these teams, and we're probably going to see them in a prelim this year, because Geelong just happen to find ways to do it all the damn time. For the votes, I did land on Oliver Dempsey for the one. 19 disposals, 4 contested, 2 marks, 2 tackles, 3 clearances, 249 metres gained, 4 goals, 7 score involvements. I gave the 2 vote to Oliver Henry. 13 disposals, 6 contested, 4 marks, 5 tackles, 253 metres gained, 4 goals, 1 goal assist, 10 score involvements, and best on was Bailey Smith. 38 disposals, 15 contested, 3 marks, 6 tackles, 8 clearances, 751 metres gained, 7 score involvements. I think we know what we learned from this game. We've already touched on it quite comprehensively, and if I've upset any Essendon fans by doing so, I apologise. But if you think my sooking up until this point in time has been bad, wait till the next game where my boys feature, because boy oh boy have I got some shit to talk about. Down at Adelaide Oval, in the fucking pouring rain, Adelaide hosted Richmond, and Adelaide walk away with a 9-point win. Now, while they walk away with 4 points, I think Richmond walk away with a hell of a lot more. They pushed a top 6 team, a finals contending team, to the brink. They led at many points during this game, and I'm not at all suggesting the umpiring cost us, because Tom Lynch not being able to convert any goals. You know, Lawler having a shot that he should have nailed to put us in front, and missing, goes begging. But this was another game where holding the ball was happily paid to Adelaide and reluctantly refused against Richmond. I just don't understand. There were some plays within minutes of each other where Taj Houghton gets tackled immediately with ball in hand. No prior opportunity, doesn't try to take the tackle on, holding the ball straight away. The very next chain, a defender from Adelaide breaks one tackle, gets tackled by Tim Taranto, tries to take the tackle on, will ball it up. Later on in the same chain, very similarly, Tex Walker gets the ball on the bounce in the middle of the ground, gets tackled and drops it. Play on. No holding the ball. Other instances, Tex Walker gifted a 50, he marks the ball, Kai Anand pushes him, doesn't make contact with the ball. Tex Walker throws the ball up in the air when he gets pushed, 50 metres. I don't get it. And let's not get started about Jaden Short. In the pissing down rain, he slides to go in for a ball. He gets his hands on the footy. He has won the ball. And then an Adelaide player falls over him because he slid in, and it's a free kick for sliding, taking out the legs. It's not what it's there to be paid for. Sliding to take out the legs is a deliberate act to dive when a player is there. In the wet, you're going to get carried through. I feel it is so rough. The first one you could probably pay. The second one, definitely not. I will argue that to the hills. I just feel, as a Richmond man, and I don't at all want to, and I'm not suggesting that we lose games because we're umpired differently, because we have shot ourselves in the foot many times before. I've already detailed how for this particular game. But there are so many tackles that don't get paid, and, you know, there were instances where they were throwing the ball, Adelaide, like literally just throwing it, and it's play on. But then as soon as Richmond get possession, holding the ball. Free kick. There is a decent gap in this game of the free kicks paid as well. And it's not just the free kicks that were paid, but the ones that weren't. And it just sets that gap. And again, it's a finals contending team that managed to get the better rub of the green. I don't understand it. A lot of people suggest, I've seen comments like, oh, you'd rather pay the free kicks to Adelaide because in Adelaide the supporters are rough and you don't want to be against them. I think that's ridiculous. I've posted on many forums on social media explaining my disdain against the umpiring, and many agree. Only Adelaide supporters seem to be the ones that don't. And again, it's not just myself, but many neutral supporters over the course of this weekend have been very vocal about the adjudication of games. And it just holds the AFL in such poor regard, especially with the talk that's come out about Geelong and the secret contracts that were signed about, concussion protocols and going against it. I just feel it is painting the AFL in such a bad light that eventually as an organisation they need to be held in disrepute and bringing the game into disrepute. It's going to happen. It's really going to happen. There's going to be an inquiry at some point. I can see it in the very near future. People are already calling for Andrew Dillon to be moved on. I still feel they fumbled by not signing Brendan Gale years ago when they could have. But we'll break down the match timeline. We'll continue to talk about it. At quarter time, Richmond led 2-2-14 to 1-3-9. At half-time, Adelaide led 4-5-29 to 4-4-28. At three-quarter time, Adelaide led 7-7-49 to 6-9-45, and the final scoreline was Adelaide 9-9-63 to Richmond 7-12-54. Now again, we had opportunities. We went begging. In the last term alone, we kicked 1 goal 3. We let them go on to kick 2 goals 2. So we convert 2 of those goals and bam, we win the game. So again, not without our faults here, but from forward half intercepts, they scored 5 goals 3. And they intercepted the ball in the forward half 23 times. Now, you might be able to chop that up to poor weather. You might be able to chop that up to just poor decision-making by Richmond. There was one that Nick Vlosten just put down the throat of a young kid from Adelaide, and they converted, and that absolutely killed me. But, again, yeah, I'm just not happy with the adjudicating in this game. Like, it doesn't take away from some of the performances individually, but statistically, we matched them in so many areas, and in some we beat them. I mean, in disposal, they had more of it, 358 to 317. However, we had 51 inside 50s to 50. We ran at slightly better percentage around the ground. We both ran at only 35 and 34% inside 50 respectively. They had 9 more free kicks. 9 more free kicks paid, including, I think it was, 2 or 3 50-meter penalties that resulted in goals. And again, that just decisions like that kill a game. Kill a game. I mean, I posted on a Richmond post on social media that Richmond should just foot the bill and allow Uze to pull a Hardwick and question the umpiring fraternity and ask them why Richmond get adjudicated holding the ball differently each and every fucking game. Feel free to argue that with me, but watch a Richmond game and you watch the amount of tackles we lay that go unrewarded, and then instantly the opposition will get one. It just infuriates me. And it was a story that was told not just in this game, but over the course of the whole weekend. How many free kicks were missed with North Melbourne laying tackles and the Bulldogs not getting pinned? Or Fremantle laying tackles and Melbourne not getting pinned? People are saying this was the worst adjudicated round of football in a very long time, and I agree. And I will help push that headline as much as I can. In the stoppage, we only lost the hitouts 42 to 39. We won the clearances 39 to 38. At stoppage, we were better 33 to 28, which was our biggest gap. Uncontested possession, they only had 21 more. And they turned the ball over 5 more times than we did. We actually took more marks inside 50. 10 marks inside 50 we took for 61 marks total. They only took 68. We laid 58 tackles to 66. And we laid 10 of those inside 50, of which none of them were rewarded for holding the ball. And I just think it's the forward half tackles that we lay that go unrewarded. The tackle that Tim Taranto laid that should have been paid took me back to, I think it was like 2015, 2014, in the final where Shane Edwards chases down a North Melbourne defender, lays the tackle, plain as day, caught holding the ball, game on the line, and it was play on. So you can stem it back all the way to then if you choose to for the guys that are wearing the hats like me. But fuck, it was hard. I'm very proud of Richmond for putting up the fight they did. And again, it wasn't without our own fault. If Sam Lawler converts that goal, what happens following that? If Tom Lynch could convert, what would happen? I mean, if Tom Lynch kicked straight, we would have beaten Carlton twice this year. That's fact. And that would have us probably out of the bottom two, maybe still in the bottom four, but we'd be higher up, and maybe we wouldn't be having conversations about how bad Richmond have been this year had we had 1, 2, or 3 more games for the season. But I see shining light. And again, I think we take more out of this than Adelaide. Adelaide walk away with 4 points, don't get me wrong. But they can still fall into that wildcard configuration and get bounced out first week. And that's the number 1 pressure team. Richmond out-pressured the number 1 pressure team in the competition. Our midfield was great in clearance. Forward half of the ball, we were looking strong. Defensively, Kai Anand, he looks great. I love him. I think he's already made, straight up walk-in to replace Nathan Broad, who's going to retire next week. Nick Vlosten, getting back to his best. Having Ben Miller back in is sensational. So we look great around the ground, and we've got the right pieces, and we're ready to go. Just a little bit of continuity moving forward. But again, maybe it's hard to find motivation and driving factor when we're bringing the pressure and it's going up unrewarded. But I digress. For the votes for this game, some people might think I'm a bit brash by doing what I did here, but I'm only giving Jordan Dawson 1 vote. Now, he had 35 disposals. 5 of those were contested. He took in kick-ins. He was a kick behind the play for most of the game, so he got easy ball out the back, and he ran at a little over only 50% disposal efficiency, which was why I dropped him down. But 35 disposals, 5 contested, 6 marks, 2 tackles, 2 clearances, 596 metres gained, 1 goal, 2 goal assists, and 6 score involvements. I gave the 2 vote to Jack Ross. Almost gave it to Seth Campbell. Very much looked at Tim Taranto. But I feel in the clearance, Jack Ross really came into his own in this game and was a driving force for us. 29 disposals, 11 contested, 1 mark, 2 tackles, 6 clearances, 493 metres gained, and 5 score involvements. And best on ground, highest ranked player on the field. Statistically, like if you play SUPERCOACH, he scored over 220 odd SUPERCOACH points. He is the highest rated Adelaide player in history for a game of football, outbeating Mark Rashudo. It was a great game from Isaac Rankin. He proved his worth in gold in this particular outing. 36 disposals, 18 contested, 6 marks, 6 tackles, 11 clearances, 795 metres gained, 1 goal, 1 goal assist, 5 score involvements. What did we learn? I think Richmond's future is bright, and the light at the end of the tunnel is getting closer and closer and closer, and I feel it's only going to be a matter of time before things click into place. I think we're going to be competing for finals within the next, let's say, 2 to 3 years. Next year might be a little bit rough, and I think Uze's job will be on the line next year. But after that, we should definitely be primed to be making moves. If we can secure Zach Butters in the off-season, it could fast-track it a little bit. But if we don't, there are other players around the traps that might be available. If Matt Rowell is very upset and wants to get out of the Gold Coast, I'll happily bring Matt Rowell down to Richmond. I'll take him. And, we've got the draft to hit as well. So we've gone through that draft process. We've got all the young talent. Now is Richmond's time, and I think this has been the game plan all along, to now push for those middle-aged, ready-to-go players to build these young kids around, to bring in that leadership, that driving force, and to move forward. For Adelaide, they escape defeat narrowly. And to play how they did, and you can put it down to the weather or whatever the case may be, but if they play football like they did like this when it comes to finals time, goodbye, you're gone round 1. I don't care. I'm still very disgruntled with this game. And at this point in time, even though Tex has come out and said he's going to retire, and it wouldn't be good for Adelaide to see them hit that wildcard configuration and get bounced out first week after how this game played out, maybe I wish it upon him. Maybe, just a little bit. I don't know. Let's move on. The first of 3 was at Manuka Oval, with GWS hosting the Gold Coast, who had dropped their last 10 games in a season that they started off so incredibly strong, and people were touting them as finally having the pieces together to push for a premiership, to do damage come finals, and the fall from grace is to be studied, truly. I mean, Damien Hardwick comes out a few weeks ago in a post-game press conference and says that they've basically written the season off. There's talk about players being unhappy with Hardwick as a coach. There's talk about players wanting to leave. And they come out in a hit-out that has seen GWS win more often than not when these two teams go head-to-head in the Expansion Cup. And the Gold Coast, they've won their last 2 outings. This was a game they needed to win. Not for finals, not for anything else, but to just rein it in and to block the outside noise completely out. It doesn't change what's happening off the field, do not get me wrong, but at least on the field, getting a little bit of continuity back and winning a game does a lot to rebuild that confidence that has clearly been lost with this group. From the last 17 encounters, GWS had won 15. And going into this game, with GWS still having a wild card contention still on the line, I expected more. And it was the Gold Coast in the depths, winning by 2 points in a game where wayward kicking completely cost them. The match timeline will break it down for you. At quarter time, Gold Coast led 3-4-22 to 2-4-16. At halftime, 5-5-35 led 3-7-25. Three-quarter time, 10-8-68 led 8-8-56. And the final score line, the Gold Coast Suns 11-13-79 defeated 11-11-77. The Gold Coast go on in the final term to kick 1 goal 5, so they could have blown the margin out by a lot more, but respectively, GWS go on to kick 3 goals 3 in a 2-point game. Could have well and truly iced the cake by being a little bit more accurate when it was needed. But again, as I just said, the Gold Coast, if they were accurate, could have blown this out by a lot more. This was a game where they needed particular players to stand tall, and they did. None bigger than the duo of Matt Rowell and Touk Miller. There were injuries. Laverde and Bedford, both for GWS, ended up hurt, and in a season where they have seen many upset with injury, doesn't look good at the end of the season to be doing those. I don't know how long they're out for, but that's unfortunately the way things fell. Statistically for this game, the Gold Coast did have more of the ball, 353 to 321, but GWS had 10 more inside 50s, 58 to 48, only running at 41% efficiency inside 50. And in a game where the free kick count was split 20-20 apiece, this was still a game where I felt Gold Coast had the better rub of the green. GWS had many free kicks that weren't paid, and some of the frees that did go to the Gold Coast were very borderline, very touch and go. But I'm not at all suggesting, comparatively to other games, that it was adjudication that broke this game down, because the Gold Coast won the stats that mattered. Hitouts, 63 to 42. Clearances, 53 to 45. A 15 to 8 gap at centre clearance. They had more uncontested possession. They turned the ball over only 2 more times, but they only allowed GWS to take 36 marks for the game when they average 86 for the season. They were able to negate GWS in the contest incredibly. They laid 90 tackles for the game. GWS laid 85, both of which were well up on seasonal averages of 61 and 53, respectively. But when you have a look at the individual performances for this game, the stat lines add up, and it was, again, a game where, and we speak about Rowell, Miller, Anderson, and Petrarca as potentially the best 4 midfielders together collectively, like the best quartet. And in this game, the highest 3 rated players are Matt Rowell, Touk Miller, and Noah Anderson. But you have to scroll a long way down the list, and Christian Petrarca was the 4th lowest Gold Coast Sun. Don't know what's happening with him, but there is discourse from the start of the season to now to see the drop that he has had individually when he's going to arguably be leading the Brownlow after the first 5 or 6 rounds. Yeah, wild to see the drop off, but hard to look past particular, players here. I think Noah Anderson has been stiffed by myself in a game where he had 10 tackles and 9 clearances. I did look elsewhere when it come to votes here, and I went a little bit left field, because the one vote I am chucking to Bailey Humphrey. I thought his roll-off of half forward truly helped sink the win here for the Gold Coast. Only had 19 disposals, 11 were contested, 2 marks, 3 tackles, 4 clearances, 231 metres gained, kicked 1 goal and the 1 goal assist, but had 8 score involvements, which was up, I think, amongst the most. I think he actually might have had the most score involvements for the game, and he did. Comfortably, comparatively to Noah Anderson, who had 4. So he doubled the output in that retrospect. And in a game where you win by a singular kick, I think score involvements are critical to be mentioned. The 2 vote goes to Tuke Miller. 23 disposals, 9 contested, 5 marks, 9 tackles, 3 clearances, 428 metres gained, 3 goals and 7 score involvements. And Matt Rowell, career high numbers, best on ground. This is the numbers you expect from a Brownlow medalist. My personal take, especially one that blew out the voting that we have seen in recent years. 40 disposals, 21 contested, 4 marks, 16 tackles, 17 clearances, 881 metres gained, 1 goal assist, 7 score involvements. Bedford going down obviously drops the tag and he gets off the chain. But to have 40 disposals, 16 tackles, 17 clearances, this was a generational rip. This was Matt Rowell telling everybody that he is still here, all eyes on him. And with all the talk about Zach Butters being the number 1 recruit in the off-season for teams, if Matt Rowell is gettable, all teams would be absolutely stupid to not be invested in trying to get him on board, especially if there's discourse at the Gold Coast that are going to push them out. Don't know what we learn more from in this game. GWS have been very inconsistent this year, but I do personally chop that up to the injuries and underperforming because of that, because I feel when they have a fit Jesse Hogan, a fit Tom Green, a fit Josh Kelly, Toby Green, all these players in, they have one of, if not the best teams on paper. Comfortably. But they haven't been able to find continuity in that space. And the Gold Coast started the year off so hot, dropped off completely. They win a game here. But it's too late. They've come to a point where I don't think they can even make wildcard contention now. So they're going to miss finals completely, which means they have taken a huge step backwards. So what did we learn? I don't know, ineptitude from both teams have cost them this year. And I'm fully backing GWS to make the at least wildcard next year, but I wouldn't put it past them fully fit to finish in the top 6 and lock up a guaranteed final spot. But with the Gold Coast, we could genuinely see some players leave. Now, I don't know whether you can buy into all the rumours, but I've seen rumours suggesting Daniel Rioli wants to come back to Richmond, that Christian Petrarca is upset with the environment up there and it isn't the environment he was promised. They rolled the dice with Jamara Ugle-Hagan and that's blown up in their face. Apparently, Hardwick has been referencing the dynasty at Richmond so much that the players hate it, and there is disconnect between player and coach. And if that is the case, and they feel Hardwick is their man, are we about to see a Gold Coast Sun exodus? Because we already know Bailey Humphrey is definitely going to be up for grabs at the end of the year, potentially ending up at Melbourne, which would be a huge get for them. Is Matt Rowell gettable? When Tasmania comes in, I feel they'll swing at Noah Anderson and potentially try to nab him. Could Christian Petrarca, after 1 year at the Gold Coast, want out? There's going to be a lot to go in the off-season, and I feel the Gold Coast are going to be at the centre of some of the biggest moves. I've got a gut feeling about it. Let's move on, but keep that in the back of your mind. You heard me potentially say it first. We fly on over to the West, Optus Stadium, West Coast hosting Collingwood in a game where Collingwood, with a lot of outs, picked up a 19-point win. Do we rattle off the names that were missing in this game? Jordan De Goey, Scott Pendlebury, Pat Lipinski, no Darcy Moore. They've got no Jamie Elliott. That we can keep rolling the dice here. Let's look at the lineups and see the ins and outs for this game alone. Out, Jeremy Howe, Harry Perryman, Pat Lipinski, Scott Pendlebury, Jordan De Goey. 5 guaranteed starting best 22. You throw in Jamie Elliott, you throw in Darcy Moore, you throw in Braden Maynard. There's 8 of your starting 22. That is 1/3 of your starting team gone. This was primed for the picking for West Coast, especially when they bring in Liam Baker, Josh Lindsay, and Tom Gross, who I do rate as a player. And they just, in part, were blown out in certain areas, and it was another game where a lot of people said Nick Dacos is going to have to put them on his back and carry them. And it wasn't just an effort from him, but it was an effort from Josh Dacos. It was Darcy Cameron in the ruck. Billy Frampton. Could he be having a very underrated All-Australian year? That's the question that's now being posed out of this game. The match timeline shows that West Coast, for at least a half, were incredibly competitive, and they came back late in the last term, but it was all said and done. At three-quarter time, the gap was too hard for them to stem back. At quarter time, Collingwood led 6-3-39 to 6-1-37. At half-time, Collingwood led 10-5-65 to 9-5-59. At three-quarter time, Collingwood led 15-11-101 to 12-6-78. And the final score saw Collingwood 17-15-117 defeat the West Coast 15-8-98. In that final term, they only went on to they kicked 2 goals 4, but they opened the door for the Eagles to kick 3 goals 2. They made a hard press late, but again, that gap at three-quarter time, too insurmountable. It was a game where Collingwood, it was a game where Collingwood, despite all the outs, had their biggest game in retrospect of inside 50s. They recorded 63 inside 50s, which is the most in any game this year. Collingwood, with backs against the wall, all those players out, managed to register 63 inside 50s, which was the most by any team this season. They looked incredibly potent. 32 of those inside 50s were scores. It's just something that we haven't seen from Collingwood in a very long time. I mean, 51% of your entries were scoring. More often than not. Toss a coin. They're either scoring or they're not. 50-50 flip. And this is a team. Now, let's not forget, this is a team that has been spoken about and thrown under the bus for a while now as not having a comprehensive forward half. Even though Tim Membry has been solid this year and Dan McStay is in a rich vein of form, everybody's been discrediting them, especially since Jamie Elliott fell to injury. But yet, this is a game where they managed 63 inside 50s, which was the most recorded inside 50 count for a team this year. From that, they scored 32 times, 51% conversion rate inside 50 versus score. Was absolutely huge. And in a game where, as I said, with all those outs, they needed people to stand tall. And the Dacos boys, they did that. And I've still got a gut feeling. I've still got a gut feeling that both the Dacos boys are going to end up at Tasmania. It's just something that has been irking me ever since last year at the Collingwood BNF when Nick didn't win. Peter Dacos storms out. During the off-season, they're sighted down at the Tasmania Oval, like with Tassie. Like, I don't know. I think just at this point in time, it might be time to try to forge their own legacy instead of chasing it at Collingwood like their dad did. You know, make a name for themselves, and if the money comes calling, they'd be stupid to knock it back. Putting the conspiracies aside, when you look at the team stats, West Coast were up to their necks in this game. 376 disposals to 370 by Collingwood. Collingwood did have the 64 inside 50s, but West Coast still had 52 of their own, so they weren't without their options and their possibilities here. 45 hitouts to 36, the way of West Coast Eagles. And yet I still argue that despite they lose that count, Darcy Cameron was pivotal in this game, so much so that I did give him votes. In the clearance, 47 to 36 the way of Collingwood, so they weren't getting the hitouts, but Collingwood was smart enough to start roving to West Coast. They put a gap on 18 to 13 at centre clearance, 29 to 23 at the stoppage. Contested possession was Collingwood's favour. Uncontested was West Coast's favour. But they turned the ball over 8 more times, West Coast. And when you've got players like Nick Dacos waiting to get that ball turned over, losing it, giving it to intercepts, fumbling the ball, Collingwood have the players that are going to pounce on that every day of the week. 85 marks to West Coast. Collingwood only took 60 in a year where they're averaging 97.8 a game. So well down on output in that retrospect, but they still managed to find ascendancy around the contest. 12 marks inside 50, 6 contested, 74 tackles. They brought the pressure. They forced the fumbles. They forced the turnover. They forced the intercepts. And again, Not just physical pressure, but perceived pressure, just corralling and forcing West Coast in position to dump the ball down long, either marked or spoiled, brought to ground, and then Collingwood were ready for the counter-attack each and every time. A game that Collingwood needed to win, and I think very much so. I think they have locked up a finals berth here, so they are going to play at least in the wild card. And given how some of the outcomes could go moving forward, Collingwood versus Carlton in wild card would be absolutely huge, especially with all of these players out injured. Well, we don't know if they're injured actually, because the talk from AFL is now you can't be resting players in the final round of the season if you're playing wild card. You're not allowed to do that because there's going to be sanctions and each and every in between. Do we think, looking at this lineup, that De Goey, Pendlebury, Lipinski, Howe, and Perryman are all legitimately injured? We know Perryman did a hamstring, so we know he's out. And we know Howe at least did a shoulder, so he's out. But Lipinski, Pendlebury, and De Goey? Or is this going to be like a one-off? Oh, they were injured, but now they're magically better next week. Like, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But they've got a lot of potency to come back into this team. And I think as far as wildcard teams go, Collingwood could be ones that do the most damage when they've got all the pieces in place, because nobody is paying them any mind. Everybody is discrediting this team. I gave votes to these three players, but I can't understate the impact that Daniel McStay had in this game. He kicked 3 goals, but had 15 score involvements off his own boot. 15 score involvements when they have 27 scores as a team. It was a huge output from him. As I said, a rich vein of form, and I think he's starting to show why Collingwood were interested in recruiting him in the first place. I gave 1 vote to Josh Dacos. Off of halfback, absolutely sensational. I still argue he should be running through the midfield with Nick. And I think that would be a duo that would be hard to stop. And in some cases, you wouldn't know which Dacos to tag. But he had 35 disposals, 5 contested, 3 marks, 6 tackles, 1 clearance, 901 metres gained, and 8 score involvements. I gave the 2 vote to Darcy Cameron. I thought in the ruck, he was absolutely sensational. 24 disposals, 12 contested, 5 marks, 5 clearances, 5 tackles, 30 hitouts, 6 clearances, 198 metres gained, and 8 score involvements. And Nick Dacos was best on for me. Couldn't be tagged, couldn't be stopped, set up a lot of ball for them out of that midfield. 39 disposals, 17 contested, only 1 mark and 1 tackle, but had 10 clearances, 721 metres gained, 1 goal, 2 goal assists, 12 score involvements, and helps get Collingwood over the line. And what is scary about this is we know 2 weeks ago, before the Brisbane Carlton game, Lachie Neale went out of his way to tour the Collingwood club rooms. We know he's going to be on the out from Brisbane. It's just a matter of whether he goes west or whether he comes to Victoria. Collingwood have now put forth, and I spoke about it earlier in the video, a club-defining deal. The biggest in club history is now being touted at as trying to get Zach Butters. Could we imagine a midfield in 2027 that has Nick Dacos, Lachie Neale, Zach Butters? Even though Lachie Neale's at the end of his career, I reckon he's still got a good 2 to 3 years in him, at minimum. Zach Butters is prime aged. Nick Dacos is still growing into the game, and he's an absolute gun. We could be looking at an unstoppable force if Collingwood can land these players. It is going to be one to watch. What did we learn? West Coast can still, they've been so competitive this year, even when losing. And it just tells me, and should tell West Coast supporters, and should be a good indicator to neutrals, that they're on the right path. They're probably only 1 or 2 senior players that they need to attract to the club away from truly setting up something special here. They've got all the young talent. It is bringing in the established talent to help support around that. Similar to the position Richmond's now in. Even though I would argue West Coast are slightly ahead with the level of talent that has been showcased, because Richmond have been hampered with injuries, so we still don't know whether or not some of the kids we've drafted are good enough. And that's going to be a learning curve for us. But West Coast, they're showing these kids, especially the mid-season draftees that they're getting at middle age, are so incredible. So great. And they're setting themselves up. And I still argue within the next 2 years, West Coast will be wildcard contending. At the minimum. Bare minimum. For Collingwood, they're playing finals this year. Are they good enough to get out a wild card? I would bank on it. I would bet on it. And if they can make the top 8 following that, maybe one of the biggest threats to finish outside of the top 6 to push for a tilt, especially if they can get any of the 8 that I named. If they can get all of those 8 back come finals, boy, oh boy, they could go for a tilt that nobody would have seen coming and would shock the world. The final game of the round was a double header, closing the round for AFL men's, but opening the season for AFLW. St Kilda taking on Carlton in both retrospects. I was at the AFLW game prior because my daughter took part in a girls-only half-time Auskick event. Was incredibly humbling and a proud moment for myself as a father to see my daughter get to experience that for the first time. And the AFLW actually had a little over 20,000 people turn out to watch, so that's a great return for AFLW season to kick off. And given how that game played out, I would love to see AFLW target Marvel Stadium as a potential grand final location for that particular event. But when we left, heading into the men's, there were thousands upon thousands flocking in, and I think for every one St Kilda fan I saw, there were 4 or 5 Carlton fans. They were rocking up in droves because this particular game had so much on the line. If Carlton win, they all but lock up a wild card spot. St Kilda win, they keep their wild card chances alive. And in the end, it was Carlton by 44 points. And this, like, the growth of this team and the trajectory they were on at the start of the season versus to where they're at now, it is almost unthinkable to think that they have just turned around 360 and are showing some of the most cleanest skills by foot that any team has demonstrated in the back half of this season. They looked impressive from start to finish. I still question whether or not there was true disconnect between Michael Voss and the players, because I just think it is more than coincidental that as soon as Michael Voss leaves, Carlton turn a page. I don't know whether it's a new system, whether it's new strategies that are in place, that players are getting opportunities, or that they're just invested in Josh Fraser as coach. And after they won this game, the crowd themselves chanting for Fraser as their next coach was almost deafening. And to think where they were going at the start of the season, looking at a potential bottom 4 finish, to now playing in a wild card contending spot to play in the finals, you'd be stupid not to offer this man the job. And yet he still is openly pushing against it. I don't understand why. Maybe he feels like he's not ready. Maybe he doesn't want to take on that responsibility. He's comfortable where he's at. But what this man has done for this club cannot be understated, and would have to have him as an interim coach in Coach of the Year conversations. Personal opinion. I don't know whether he qualifies as an interim coach, but what he has done and the turnaround he has done, holy shit, very impressive. Now, this game spelt doom for St Kilda, not just on the outcome, but with things that happened throughout. And we'll get to that momentarily after we talk about the match timeline, because this was a game that unfortunately was dead at quarter time, even though the contest was very tight in score. I feel all the momentum into that first break was Carlton's way, and it just flowed that way for the rest of the game. 3-3-21 led 1-2-8 at quarter time, 8-5-53 led 4-4-28 at half time, 11-8-74 led 5-9-39 at 3/4 time, and full score 16-10-106 defeated 8-14-62. Absolutely tore them apart, as I said, by foot. It was incredibly clean. Just to see the skills that this team is showing now comparatively to the opening 8 to 10 rounds of the season. As I said, the turnaround is just absolutely incredible. Now, Mason Wood did a calf injury, which is terrible to always see any player of any retrospect do an injury, but halfway through the first quarter, Nasiah Wanganeen-Malira pings his left hamstring and he is done for the season. I do not think St Kilda make wildcard from here, especially without Nasiah Wanganeen-Malira. Now, if they lose to Richmond this coming weekend, Their wildcard's done. They need to win their next 2 games and hope for Carlton to lose both of theirs if they are any chance. And even then, they're only purely getting in on percentage. And if they don't boost that percentage, but Carlton lose and percentage boost, we could see still Carlton make that configuration just purely on percentage alone. So it's going to be an interesting watch, but none bigger than Naz going down is going to hurt. Now, St Kilda did a number on Richmond earlier in the year without Nasiah Wanganeen-Malira, but they've hedged their bets so much on this kid that without him, can they deal any damaging blows to the teams that they are going to be taking on? Richmond just did incredibly well against Adelaide, and they're going to take a lot of that momentum into this upcoming game. So remains to be seen whether St Kilda can mathematically still limp their way into wildcard contention, but I think this loss all but confirms they will not feature at all. Statistically, dominance by Carlton, 405 disposals to 331, 235 kicks to 176. Absolutely by foot decided they were just going to put the foot down, quite literally, and just absolutely dominate this game. 56 inside 50s to 44. Stoppage game was actually won marginally by St Kilda in the clearance, 42 to 35, but 33 hitouts to 29. I thought Mark Pitnett did a great job as a solo ruck against TDK and Rowan Marshall, but mainly Rowan Marshall because TDK was rather inept and rather useless, and we'll get to that momentarily. 267 uncontested possessions with 117 marks to back that up just showed Carlton were happy to keep momentum by foot and by marking and just systematically move the ball around the ground as they saw fit. 21 marks inside 50 when they're averaging 12 for the season is huge. Absolutely incredible. They knew exactly what they needed to do. They know the likes of Kel Wilkie are going to be licking their chops at the opportunity to intercept marks. So the way they were just picking each and every moment out was meticulous and done absolutely brilliantly. Defensively, 60 marks to 42. Just the pressure that they mounted. Everything was coming up Blues. And they more than deserve not only a wild card contending position, but as much as it pains me to say it, they deserve to play finals this year on the run that they've had. Absolutely incredible. As I said, it pains me to say it, but that is the case. Now, for the votes for this game, there were a few players that I feel were stiff. I thought Ollie Florent in defence was solid. I thought Sam Walsh was great. But I think the players I landed on cannot be argued against. I am giving the one vote to Mark Pitnett. As I said, to take on 2 ruckmen like he did, I feel he had big moments that defined the game. 17 disposals, 12 contested, 2 marks, 3 tackles, 25 hitouts, 7 clearances, 196 metres gained, 2 goals, 4 score involvements. To get the clearances, to win the hitouts, and I think collectively TDK and Rowan Marshall had about 30 hitouts between them, and this guy got the 25 on his own. Absolutely incredible. To hit the scoreboard, to get involved with a few score involvements. I thought it was great to see. And obviously, St Kilda are coming into this with a bit of an edge because they've got that 1-2 punch. So to be able to wade through that, I think he needs a mention. I'm giving 2 votes to Max Hall, despite the gap in score, because it is hard to argue against not voting for a player, even if it isn't a losing team, when he leads the game in clearances, in score involvements, and in contested possession. He had 30 disposals, 16 were contested, 6 marks, 2 tackles, 10 clearances, 524 metres gained, 2 goals, 1 goal assist, and 11 score involvements. This guy would have to be in conversation as one of the most improved players in the comp. And the fact that he has gone and locked up I think he's locked up recently a contract extension, he would be much sought after, I think, once that contract is up. He is absolutely dynamite, and he is a big reason why St Kilda have won games this year. It hasn't been on the back of Naz or these other recruits that they've brought in on high money like TDK, who was absolutely useless. They need to invest in the young kids they've already got that are growing underneath their light, which is exactly what Max Hall has done this year. The best on, in my eyes, was Frankie Evans. I thought it was his best game he has played for Carlton, and if he can deliver more performances like this, could become one of the most dangerous small forwards in the competition. 22 disposals, 7 were contested, 8 marks, 4 tackles, 613 metres gained, 1 goal, 2 goal assists, 10 score involvements. Cannot understate what he did here. And obviously what we learned coming out of this game is Carlton's continuity that they have now found in this new style, in this new belief system. There is nothing stopping them. They have nothing to lose. They had a season, as I said earlier, that was about to see them finish bottom 4. They are just rolling the dice. They are throwing shit at the wall and seeing if it sticks, and it is working almost 100% of the time. Players that were lacking confidence have now got confidence again. Players that started a little bit slow are getting into great seasonal form. We were talking about the downfall of the Gold Coast needing to be studied. The rise of Carlton is the polar opposite of that. It is absolutely incredible. You've got to give credit where it's due, whether or not you've got preconceived notions about clubs and feelings towards them. They are on one hell of a rip. And as a neutral supporter, you love to see it. You love to see the underdog rise up. You love to see an interim coach come in and inspire a group. And that's exactly what's going on with Carlton. St Kilda's issue now starts to buckle. They have heavily invested in Naz. They go through Naz all the time. He loves taking the kick-ins. He gets the 1-2s. Without Naz, what are they going to do next? 2 games to go. They need to win both. Let's see how they roll out. But again, I've said it numerous times through the season. Great signings and signings of superstar players does not make a superstar team. And these superstars are falling like flies. So they're going to have a rough run home. I mean, Richmond, they're not going to be a pushover, at least I hope, with what the effort that they showed this past weekend. So fingers crossed we might pick up a win here, Tigers fans, if you're watching. But the big talking point, as I said, is Carlton. AFLW win, Carlton's men win. Big fucking weekend, big moment for the club. And could we see the upset of all upsets? Could Carlton work their way to a prelim and into the grand final this year? Because Carlton on grand final day, I would hate to be anywhere near the MCG. I'm telling you that right now. With all the rounds broken down, this is how the AFL ladder is situated after 22 rounds of football and with 2 rounds to go in the 2026 home and away season. In first place, and not probably going to lose that mantle. They can draw, but they've got a big enough kind of gap between first and second on percentage, so they're not losing that number 1 mantle. Fremantle on 72 points. In second place on 64, we have Sydney. In third place on 58, we have Hawthorn. And in fourth place, equally with the 2 other teams, we have Brisbane on 56 points. Just behind them on 0.2%, we have Adelaide in 5th place. And in 6th place, 10% behind 4th, is Melbourne. There's our guaranteed 6 that are going to be playing finals this year. Melbourne, at the very least, cannot drop out of wildcard contention, so they're going to feature in some way, shape or form. In 7th place on 52 points, we have Geelong. In 8th place on 50 points, we have Collingwood. In 9th place on 48 points, we have the Western Bulldogs. And rounding out top 10, the wildcard configuration, we have Carlton on 44. Now, Geelong, Collingwood and the Bulldogs won't miss this year. The teams underneath them, the best they can do is draw even if the Bulldogs lose 2 games in a row. And even then, I don't think it's possible just with some of the fixturing we're going to have. So I think this is our top 10 that we are going to see moving on. It's just a matter of where they end up. And if we get Geelong, Bulldogs and Collingwood, Carlton in the first week of wildcard, we could see some big hit-outs going on. In 11th place, still a mathematical chance, we have St Kilda on 36 points, trailed by GWS in 12th and North Melbourne in 13th. Again, still mathematical chances, but they are coming up against teams that are already looking to lock themselves in. So it's going to be a slog, and percentage once more is going to play a big factor. The Gold Coast I was about to call them Gold Coast something, you know what I'm saying? The Gold Coast Suns are sitting in 14th on 32 points. Port Adelaide in 15th on 24 points. West Coast Eagles in 16th on 16 points. Richmond in 17th on 12 points. And Essendon in 18th on 8 points. With all the formalities out of the way and the votes tallied up, this is how the leaderboard for the Hip and Shoulder 2026 MVP Award has shaped up. In 10th place on 18 votes is Patrick Cripps. In 9th place on 19 votes is Jai Newcomb, Jason Horne-Francis, and Lachie Neale. In 8th place on 20 votes is Max Gawn. In 7th place on 21 votes is Nasiah Wangani-Malira and Will Ashcroft. In 6th place on 22 votes is Zach Butters and Luke Jackson. In 5th place on 23 votes is Jordan Dawson. In 4th place on 27 votes is Marcus Bontempelli and Isaac Heaney. In 3rd place on 29 votes is Bailey Smith. In 2nd place on 35 votes is Harry Sheasel. And in 1st place on 39 votes is Nick Dacos. And all that is left to do to recap the round is to reveal my team of the week, which has had some ins and outs go down while trying to compile this and record this video. But I think the 23 that I have landed on is definitively and arguably the best 23 coming out of the round. Again, if you agree or disagree, let's talk about it in the comments down below, you know. But this is it. My round 22 team of the week. In defence, I have Chankuoth Jayath and Lachie Whitfield in the back pockets and Billy Frampton at full back, with Josh Dacos and Jordan Dawson on the half-back flanks and Harris Andrews at centre half-back. Across the centre, I have Chad Warner and Errol Goulden on the wings and Matt Rowell in the centre, with Darcy Cameron in the ruck, Luke Davies-Uniacke in ruck rover, and Nick Dacos in rover. My forward line sees Isaac Rankin and Keziah Pickett on the half-forward flanks and Daniel McStay at centre-half-forward, with Kai Lohman and Paul Curtis in the forward pockets and Logan Morris at full-forward. My interchange consists of Harry Sheasel, Touk Miller, Francis Evans, Bailey Smith, and Lachie Neale. My coaches of the week are Stephen King and Alistair Clarkson, and my assistant coach of the week is Chris Fagan. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, the round has officially been recapped. I do thank you for joining me once more. I would appreciate it if you hit that like button down below, especially if you enjoy what I'm doing around here. And hey, if you haven't already and want to get on board the community we are piecing together, hit that subscribe button while you're down there as well. But that's it from me, guys. I'm out of here, and as always, I will catch you guys next time.